Why aren't we focusing more on the qualitative analysis when it comes to health if it's so important to us? Why are we overlooking those things when we go into even a store and try to purchase? I know you always advocate for quality supplements, quality foods, and that's what determines health. But so many doctors would say, don't even worry about that. It's more about the quantity. And we're seeing that in media, everything, the quantity is coming at us. That's why we're transforming. What is it, this shift that happens in health that we can't understand quality, but we do understand only the quantitative side?
That's an interesting perspective that I had never considered before, actually. But if I had to guess, I think the way the medical system works, and in turn, most of Westernization, is a very logical left-sided hemisphere thinking, where it's all about the quantitative factor in things. We want to quantify things. We want numbers to identify certain phenomenon. We use numbers to predict certain phenomenon, versus the qualitative side, being the right hemisphere, is more feminine. This is something that most cultures, in terms of the ones that are most modern at this moment, don't have anymore. Whereas the ancient cultures use this feminine right hemisphere side of thinking to understand that it's not all the same. It's not just ones and zeros. There's in between a gray area that determines the quality of that quantity that we're assessing. So in terms of the coronavirus, the quantity of information that we get is, incredible. You have CNN, you have Fox, you have then the scientific journals that are conflicting with each other. You have the British journals, and everything is just like this giant soup of all these ingredients that we don't really understand too well, versus the quality side of things is, well, how can we differentiate between what's the right diagnostic tool? What's the right statistics behind this? How do we know what's the right tool to even use to determine the statistics? That's not being considered. I think, once again, because of our dominant thought pattern being this logical ones and zeros kind of thinking. That's the first time I considered something like this too.
Yeah. And it comes back to that understanding even of a nurse's role at times. And I love nurses too. And I have nothing but admiration, but in many ways they're told to be technicians, which is what I think doctors are getting to be, right? You're basically told to be a technician and just do this. If A, then do B. Right? Instead of being able to see it from this quantum perspective, that A could be A, B, C, D, all of these different different outcomes of it. So I think, you're on point with that understanding of logic, because we become technicians, which are truly based in logic. Yet we are humans with emotions as well, with so many different facets to us. And that's the hard part of medicine, right? We only treat on the logical part, and yet we're so much more than that.
We even only investigate on a logical aspects. When it comes to randomized controlled trials, we're looking at a control group and experimental group. We try to account for as many biases as possible, but we never get 100%, because the human being is, exactly. Right? That only so much from a lab translates to real life.
Is that the problem, you think, with research? And listen, I appreciate evidence-based medicine, and I know everyone runs there and is like, the gold standard is evidence-based medicine. But I'm always, when I come into the center, I'm not a doctor or researcher. I'm looking at the experience-based medicine. I'm looking at people that relied on evidence-based medicine and stayed sick for decades and come to us. And then we have no evidence except maybe word of mouth, right? Trying these new things. And there's evidence, but not the same standard, I guess, as conventional medicine. And they get better. And their doctors say, we don't know what happened, right? This is a miracle or something, but we're understanding the body works in very unique ways and multiple different levels. So, what is it about research? Because you're always looking at it. What should we know as outsiders looking at research, that it may not be the end all? Or what should we be looking for to say, well, that doesn't tell the whole case or the whole story?
There's a really good method of using discrepancy with research in terms of medical science. They call it critical appraisal, where they basically critically appraise if a study is worth their time or not. So they take a bunch of papers that may have a subject worth investigating. Let's say multiple sclerosis and good outcomes versus bad outcomes. What are the difference? And so they go through like a few packets of information, skimming things to critically appraise. Do they have an inclusion criteria, an exclusion criteria? Do they have statistics behind it? Do they have results that indicate certain parameters we're looking for? If they don't, throw that study out. Where's the next one? Boom, boom, boom. Good, check. This is okay, clear it. Now, when you do that, right there and then you're creating a bias based off of medicine instead of practicality. The way they take care of that later is identifying, even after they confirm studies are good, do these good studies apply to our patients? If they don't, then even those good studies, which they originally thought were clear, can now be discarded. Right there and then you have another bias because you're looking at a patient value instead of just a broad general population perspective. So the idea that research can be split into these, either it's appropriate for our patients, it's appropriate for medical science, it's appropriate for electrical engineering or something else, it's appropriate for zoology or something. It's all based on these biases that we have, instead of actually looking at the data as a collective and realizing this all connects. Every part of this connects as one individual grouping that can be a factor involved in not only patient outcomes, but in environmental outcomes. And if we focus on that instead of splitting it into this monotonous ones and zeros, once again, logical thinking, we would have a better understanding of our human nature and our and how to better ourselves in this environment that we find ourselves in. Because we don't do that, even though they become amazing at specialization, we lose the general idea of what is health. Health is not just the amelioration of diseases. Health is the ability for an individual to thrive in the midst of whatever the environment they find themselves in. That is what we're missing.
Yeah.
Research, in my opinion, falls short in this aspect.